Hmm. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are tuning in. Thank you so much for joining me today for my next installment of Facebook and Instagram Live. And just a couple of announcements before we get into the meditation and talk. First, I'd like to mention that I am talking to two different cameras. So if you see me going back and forth like that, that's why. So yeah, I have Instagram over here on my left and my computer right in front of me, going to Facebook in that direction. So a little confusing in that way. And I also just want to mention, as I've done in the live offerings in the past, the reason for doing these live talks and sessions is that I'm building momentum up to an online meditation immersive program, a 12-week program. And so I'll just speak a little bit about the program before we get into the topic at hand. So this online meditation program that I've mentioned is called Abiding in Kindness, Compassion, Joy, and Equanimity. And it runs from October 1st, coming up in a couple of weeks actually, October 1st to December 21st. Now the program is offered in two different sections to cater to different time zones and needs. And each section meets twice a week. Section A will meet on Tuesdays and Saturday mornings from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. East Coast time. Section B meets on Tuesdays and Saturday evenings from 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. East Coast time. The program is offered on Zoom, and all of the sessions will be recorded and made available only to the retreat participants so that we can hold that container of confidentiality. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is that sometimes people look at the times and the days like, well, I can't make that, or I'll miss several and things like that. And it's fine if you miss some, or even some people just sign up for the program and do the whole thing on their own time. And that's fine. You're welcome to do that. So if you'd like to find out more about that online program, you can go to my website, www.suchsweetthunder.org. And it's right there on the home page, all of the information about the retreat and how to get registered and things like that. So hope to see you there. Okay, so on into the topic at hand, kindness, the healing power of kindness. And in some of the other sessions, I've mentioned a set of phrases that are traditionally offered to our own hearts and then to the hearts of people we like and love, the people we don't know, strangers, even to people we are challenged by, and then into the entire world, right? And with each of the Brahma Viharas, with each of those heartfelt qualities of kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, there's two sets of phrases. At least this is how I tend to offer it, and this is how I've been practicing since 2004. I've been practicing in this way. One set of phrases is really designed to allow us to really feel into the quality that we're working with, whether that's kindness or compassion or whatever. And the other set of phrases are designed to, yes, invite us into that affect of kindness or compassion, but also to bring up any resistances to that affect that we might be carrying unconsciously. The benefit of bringing up those resistances is that now we're bringing them out of the unconscious into our conscious awareness. And it becomes kind of like an alarm clock, if you will. So, for example, if I'm working with kindness and I get to know those resistances that I have in my own psyche around kindness, then let's say I'm going into my favorite cafe and somebody opens the door for me, that resistance comes up. But rather than just, passing through it and not really even noticing it, Now the resistance will come up, and that resistance will feel familiar. Oh, there's kindness being offered here, right? And then I can turn and welcome that kindness in, right? So we become sensitive to the ways that that we've cultivated resistances to kindness, and we all have them. So it's not that we're somehow wrong or defective if we have resistances to kindness. That's just very normal, right? And in fact, those resistances were created, for whatever reason, created to keep us safe. So we don't want to make those resistances wrong or bad, right? They're there to help us. But very often those resistances are outdated, right? We learned them years and years ago. And so perhaps they've outlived their expiration date. So it's this type of meditation that I would like to guide us into, and I'll just speak through the phrases. And the phrases are, may I feel safe, may I be happy and healthy, may I live a life of peace without struggle, may I open to things just as they are, may I experience the world opening to me just as I am. May I welcome whatever arises. May I welcome whatever arises. And so these might sound quite similar to some of the other phrases I've spoken to in this series, and they are quite similar. And perhaps I'll speak to that a little bit after the practice. But let's go ahead and do the meditation. So we'll do this for maybe 15 to 20 minutes or so, and we'll just be offering the phrases to our own heart. And again, you might notice some resistances coming up around the phrases. We don't need to try to get rid of those or wrestle with them or figure them out or anything, but just to notice what they feel like. Equally, the heart might open and go into a kind of warmth, a feeling of kindness. That's great. If that's happening there, enjoy that. You might not feel much or anything at all, and that's also fine. That's quite normal. And in that case, just know that the seeds are being planted for future experiences of kindness. So just inviting us now to take a moment to get into our most comfortable meditation posture, whatever that might mean for you. And this can be done really in any posture. If you think you might fall asleep, I would strongly recommend an upright, wakeful posture that can help us stay engaged. Or you can meditate with your eyes open or closed, however you're comfortable. And in a few moments then I'll ring the bell and I'll guide us in. So the invitation here is just to arrive into this present moment. There are many ways of arriving and connecting to the present moment. And for this practice, let's start with the experience of sound. And so we're invited here to simply become listeners of the present moment. There might be quiet sounds or loud sounds. There might be the sound of bird songs coming in from outside or crickets chirping. There might be the sound of rain or wind, perhaps a conversation unfolding nearby or music coming in from a neighbor. The sound of my voice. There might be pleasant sounds or unpleasant sounds or sounds that land as neutral. But regardless of how we interpret the sounds, recognizing how sounds are always present moment experiences. So if we notice our thoughts going into the future or the past, we can always reconnect to the present moment through the experience of sound. So just listening. We don't need to force anything or make anything happen. So while we're here resting and listening to the present moment, I'd like to invite us now to bring awareness to the breath. And if you feel it might be helpful and supportive for your practice, you might take a deep breath here and just notice how the breath feels. Perhaps noticing the abdomen as it rises and falls with each breath. Perhaps noticing the sensations of clothing moving across the torso with the in-breath and out-breath. We might notice how the shoulders rise and fall with each breath. The back moving out as you breathe in as you breathe out. And perhaps noticing the texture of the breath as it enters the nose and leaves the nose. There might be a dry or a cool sensation there. And see if you can notice the entire breath cycle, starting at the very beginning of the in-breath, following the in-breath to the gap, the beginning of the out-breath, all the way to the end of the out-breath. And then there may be thoughts that arise. That's very normal. And if you get distracted by those thoughts, you could label that thinking, letting the stories go and gently returning back to the present moment, to the sounds or the breath. And then while we're here resting, connecting, I'd like to invite us to notice the body and how the body feels right now in this current posture. Noticing perhaps the contact points, maybe the feet resting against the ground or the floor. The weight of the body against the cushion or chair or mat. Sensations of clothing resting against the skin. The hands resting against the body or touching each other. Perhaps also noticing how the shoulders rise and fall, the contact of clothing against the shoulders. We might even notice the lips connecting, contacting. And if there's any obvious tension or stress being held in the body, we're just gently inviting that to soften and relax. Not trying to force anything or make anything happen. Just gently extending that soft invitation. And in the next breath or two, we'll begin to offer these phrases of kindness to our own heart. The invitation then is to visualize or imagine what your life would look and feel like if each phrase was completely reflective of your own life circumstance. May I feel safe. May I be happy and healthy. May I live a life of peace without struggle. May I open to things just as they are. May I experience the world opening to me just as I am. May I welcome whatever arises. If you'd like, while we offer these phrases, you might place a hand or maybe both hands over the heart, or perhaps a hand on the heart and a hand on the abdomen. This move of compassionate support can often invite the phrases in to land. May I feel safe. May I be happy and healthy. May I live a life of peace without struggle. May I open to things just as they are. experience the world opening to me just as I am. May I welcome whatever arises. If you are using that move of compassionate support with a hand or both hands, I'd invite us to place our hands back by our side or on our legs, wherever's comfortable. Taking a few moments here to notice any resistances to the phrases that might have arisen. You might turn to the phrases, or to the resistances rather, and say, "Thank you. Thank you for being here." Noticing too any feelings of kindness or warmth that might have arisen. And just going into those feelings of kindness for a moment. As if we were sitting in the shade on a cool autumn day, and we stepped out into the warm sunshine, inviting that warmth of kindness to soak in through the face as we look up to the sun. Visualizing or imagining that warmth of kindness soaking in through the face, the neck and throat, down into the torso, flowing down through the chest, the abdomen, the legs, the feet. Nourishing our nervous system, our body, our mind, our heart in this warmth of kindness. So in a few moments' time, we'll begin to shift away from the guided meditation and back into a conversational space. And I'll cue that by ringing the bell 3 times. Well, thank you all for joining me in that guided meditation. And if your eyes are closed, you might just gently begin to open them and start to look around. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about kindness. Well, it's really tempting for me just to stay in that practice, actually. I was enjoying that. But yeah, I did have some things I wanted to mention here around this really radical practice of kindness. So, maybe as a way of getting started, I'd like to first mention from the Buddhist tradition what's known as the Four Noble Truths, or in the tradition of secular Dharma, of which I am a part of, it's called the Four Tasks or the Fourfold Practice, however you want to frame that. And those are as follows: life contains suffering. We suffer due to our craving and our emotional reactivity. We can experience the cessation of craving and reactivity. That's number 3. And the 4th is we can cultivate a path which allows us to let go of our reactivity and our craving easier. And that in itself, it's so complete, right? Life contains suffering. Life contains struggle. It contains discomfort. It contains intensity. But that's not all of it, right? That's not the end of the story. It also contains joy and beauty and compassion and kindness and art and love and all of the fruits as well, right? But here the practice is to acknowledge the challenges that are just a part of the natural course of things. Life contains suffering. And when we really feel into the implications of that, right? When we let our heart open to that truth of suffering, there's really only one choice. Let me reframe that. That's kind of a sweeping statement. There's 2 choices that I'm feeling right now as I'm speaking. But the one that I was referring to is this skillful response to this truth of suffering is kindness, is acceptance, right? It's this radical compassion. The other choice that I was referring to is, and this is the one I think most people engage in, is closing down, turning away, armoring up. But as we engage in that, and I'm speaking from firsthand experience here, if we armor our heart, if we close up, we will feel less pain, for sure. But we also feel less joy. We don't get to choose what we numb ourselves from, right? So if we're engaging in that type of defense mechanism, which many people do, they are closing themselves off not only from the discomforts of life, the pain of life, but the love, the joy, the kindness of life. Right? So if we can step into that implication of this first truth, life contains struggle, life contains discomfort, for me it feels like this kind of urgency, the urgency of love. The urgency of compassion dawns uncontrived and flows out not only from our hearts, but from the marrow of the bones. Not only from the marrow of the bones does that kindness and compassion flow out from, but from the very source of being itself. This kindness, this joy, this compassion and equanimity oozes out from our very being. When we really engage with that, yeah, life contains suffering. Oof. And, that's generally not where we start. That takes some practice. Right. First, as Rumi said, our task is not only to, paraphrasing here, so I might get some of it wrong. Our task is not to seek love, but to find all of the barriers we've erected in our own self towards love. And in that seeing, we can first work around those resistances, navigate around them, and eventually they start to soften and break down. And there's some really interesting brain studies. I think many of you know that I'm very fascinated with neuroscience, and it's somewhat of a hobby of mine. When we are kind of daydreaming or relaxing, we're not engaging in some sort of task. We, as human beings, we enter into what's known as default mode network in the brain, the default mode network. And I pointed here, and it really does run down. It's like the mohawk. It runs down the center line of the brain, the default mode network. And this default mode network is primarily concerned with ourself, our survival, our needs, our wants, our desires, our cravings, right? And, you might track this in your own experience. Next time you catch yourself daydreaming, how much selfing was being done in that daydream? How much material about I is in there? There's nothing wrong with that, right? Evolutionarily speaking, that makes sense, right? If 200,000 years ago, when we were in caves and making fire and hunting, gather tribes and things like that, if we weren't engaged in hunting or gathering, our minds needed to be focused on our safety for survival. The problem is now we don't need to do that anymore, right? We don't need our default to land us back into our self-preservation, self-concern, self-centeredness. Can we reprogram that default to the default of kindness, the default of compassion? That's the question, and that's really what all these practices and what the 12-week course that I'm offering is really designed to allow us to do. There's a quote that's been credited to Bruce Lee, although a friend of mine recently told me that this quote isn't something Bruce Lee said, but regardless, it's such a great quote that I'm going to offer it anyway. When under stress or under duress, we don't rise to the level of our expectations, but we fall to the level of our training. Under duress, we don't rise to the level of our expectations, but we fall to the level of our training. So what are we training? We know through neuroplasticity that what we are doing in this moment predicates how we will meet the next moment. We're always training something. We're always practicing something. Right? Are we training in that self-centered, survival-based affect? Or are we training in kindness? And the reason why that's quite important is that when we get activated or triggered, the logical part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, gets deactivated. So that's why we don't rise to the level of our expectations, because our expectations are here in our logical part of the brain, right? We expect that we'll be able to be kind to someone even if they say something offensive. Or we expect that we'll be able to be compassionate to the person we see suffering. But when we're confronted with that situation, we find we shut down. Right? Because when we're in that activated mode, we don't have contact to that logical part of the brain. The only part of the nervous system or the brain we have contact with is the emotional part of the brain, the limbic brain and the reptilian brain. Right? So by practicing with these phrases in this way, by meditating on kindness and compassion, equanimity, joy, we're installing the qualities, those affective qualities, into our body somatically. So that even if our prefrontal cortex is disconnected, we still have access to that wisdom. Right? We fall to the level of our training. And so when one, really takes up these practices in earnest, as we will be doing again on that 12-week course, sometimes what comes up for people is a quality of awe. Wow. Wow. Oftentimes I hear people say, how could I have been disconnected to that part of me? How could I have lost touch to that part of my heart? I know for me that was a sentence, that phrase that kept going through my head over and over again when I first started, about 6 months into a good, consistent metta practice, or practice of the Brahma Viharas, these 4 qualities. And then, we start to know that warmth of kindness as a good friend, right? And what becomes quite interesting then is that the more we start to feel that warmth of kindness, the more those contracted, tight heart qualities of jealousy or envy or hatred or ill will, those start to feel somatically really uncomfortable. And it just becomes untenable, because it requires a lot of energy to hold that anger in place. And that warmth of kindness is so open and vast and spacious. It's not contracted at all. It's open and soft and welcoming. That last phrase, may I welcome whatever arises. That's the quality of kindness. And so if you'd like, as you're listening to me, you might just check this out for a moment. You might bring into awareness a person that you're at odds with, whether you know this person or maybe it's a political figure. Plenty of that around these days. And bringing that image of that being into mind, and feeling that contraction, that tightness, that heaviness. I almost feel a little nauseous, to be honest. And then just let that go and feel the spaciousness of kindness. Or you can compare, you bring into awareness a pet that you love and that you find it's easy to be kind to. And compare that open spaciousness of heart to that contracted closeness. And then the choice becomes quite obvious. Right? So you don't have to believe me or believe other teachers or believe some scripture, some writing. Check it out for yourself. What feels better? Tight, contracted, defended, armored, closed, sheltered, or open, vast, loving, kind, warm, welcoming. In the world today, we can see, right? Just turn on the news, and we can see the result of people making those contracted states of heart and mind a refuge. We can see what the world looks like already when these unskillful habit patterns of anger and fear and aversion are cast out into the world, playing out on the world stage. We don't need any more of that. I think we can all agree there, right? We certainly don't need any more of that. And it's become so normalized that we tend to forget, right? Especially if we've had that armoring and protective resistances forming since we were very young, as I did, as I had. Right? We forget that there's that contraction around the heart, and then we feel just a second of kindness or a second of love or a second of compassion or warmth or generosity or gratitude, and wow, the eyes open. And it can remind us of the darkness that we're in. And so one of the benefits that I've noticed in my practice of kindness and the four qualities, I'll speak primarily to kindness here. As I've been feeling more kindness, those resistances, that armoring around the heart starts to soften and dissolve. But that armoring around the heart requires energy, and because it happened at such a young age, I had forgotten that I needed that energy to hold the armor in place. When that starts to soften, I have access to all of that energy, right? And because I have access to that energy and the heart becomes a little more open and less guarded, I'm less reactive. I get less caught up in likes and dislikes. And I have more energy for discerning wisdom. I can see clearer because I have energy to see. Right? With greater discerning wisdom and wiser choices, I become happier. May I be happy and healthy, right? As the phrase says. As I become happier, I have more space to be kind. As I have more space to be kind, it becomes a feedback loop here. As I have more space to be kind and compassionate, more of those resistances start to break down and dissolve. I then reclaim that energy from those resistances. Because I'm less guarded and contracted, I have less view to protect myself. Right? I have less need to armor. Right? I become less reactive, less caught up in dislikes and likes. Thus, I have more energy for discerning wisdom. I can see clearer with that energy that I've reclaimed from those dissolved resistances. This allows me to make more wiser choices, and I become happier. As I become happier, the more space for kindness and compassion, joy and equanimity I have, and it continues on and on and on like that. It's a beautiful, beautiful path. Beautiful path. And so I just want to read a story here as a way of closing. And this was a story that I heard relayed by the Insight teacher Jack Kornfield. Beautiful story. And so I'll just read it, and maybe I'll comment on it. Looking at the time here, we're running a little bit over time, but we'll see. I may just read it and close out. Let's see how it goes. Once, on the train from Washington to Philadelphia, I found myself seated next to a man who had worked for the State Department in India, but had quit to run a rehabilitation program for juvenile offenders in the District of Columbia. Most of the youths he had worked with were gang members who had committed homicide. One 14-year-old boy in his program had shot and killed an innocent teenager to prove himself to his gang. At the trial, the victim's mother sat impassively silent until the end, when the youth was convicted of the killing. After the verdict was announced, she stood up slowly and stared directly at him and stated, "I'm going to kill you." Then the youth was taken away to serve several years in the juvenile facility. After the first half year, the mother of the slain child went to his killer in the prison. He had been living on the streets before the killing, and she was the only visitor he'd ever had. For a time they talked, and when she left, she gave him some money to buy cigarettes. Then she started step by step to visit him more regularly, bringing him food and small gifts. Near the end of his 3-year sentence, she asked him what he would be doing when he got out. He was so confused and very uncertain, so she offered to set him up with a job at her friend's company. Then she inquired about where he would live, and since he had no family to return to, she offered him temporary use of the spare room in her home. This is the mother of the son that died, keep in mind, right? She's offering that to her son's killer. For 8 months he lived there, ate her food, and worked at the job. Then one evening she called him into the living room to talk. She sat down opposite him and waited. And then she started. "Do you remember in the courtroom when I said I was going to kill you?" "I sure do, ma'am," he replied. "Well, I did." She went on. "I did not want the boy who could kill my son for no reason to remain alive on this earth. I wanted him to die. That's why I started to visit you and bring you things. That's why I got you the job and let you live here in my house. That's how I set about changing you." Oof. And that old boy, he's gone now. "So now I want to ask you, since my son is gone and that killer is gone, if you'll stay here. I've got room, and I'd like to adopt you if you'd let me." And so she became the mother of her son's killer, the mother he never had. Whew. Now, our own story may not be that dramatic, of course, and yet I think we can all recognize that maybe on some level we've all been betrayed. Right? Maybe in some level we can see that our hearts respond much more readily to kindness than to threat. That true change is fostered out of compassion and equanimity rather than violence. And so I think I'll draw our time together to a close here. Thank you all once again for tuning in. I wouldn't be here without you all, so I really appreciate that. And I guess I'll be back here maybe on Sunday. I think Sunday is looking good. Might change. Who knows? Let's plan on Sunday. And have a great rest of the week, everyone. Oh, if you are interested in signing up for the 12-week course on kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, please visit my website, suchsweetthunder.org, or you can just message me here through Messenger, and we'll get you signed up. Okay, I'll ring the bell to close this out. Thank you.